When life seems like it's moving too slow, or when doors we've been praying for seem to stay shut, it's easy to grow impatient, frustrated, or even doubtful. But here's the truth: God's timing is perfect. It's not random, it's not delayed, it is perfectly orchestrated. God is never early, and He is never late. He is always exactly on time. You see, trusting God's timing requires patience. It's not just about waiting, it's about learning to trust during the waiting. Patience isn't passive, it's active faith. It's the confidence that God is working behind the scenes, even when we don't see it yet. When we rush ahead or try to control the timeline, we miss out on the divine purpose God is unfolding. God's timing is perfect, a truth that challenges our human understanding of time and control. We live in a world that values speed and instant results. When something doesn't happen quickly or on our schedule, impatience and frustration often take hold. But the divine timetable operates on a different plane, one that is beyond our limited perspective. God's timing is never early or late. It is always exactly right, perfectly aligned with His infinite wisdom and love. This perfection in timing means that every event, every delay, and every advancement is carefully orchestrated by a God who sees the beginning from the end. When we feel like we are waiting too long, or that God has forgotten our prayers, it's crucial to remember that His timing is purposeful. He does not rush, nor does He dawdle. His timing reflects His sovereignty and His desire for what is ultimately best for us. We may not understand why things take longer than we expect, but God's timing ensures that when the moment arrives, everything will come together in the way that is most beneficial. Human beings often operate on a framework of cause and effect based on immediate results. We plant a seed and we expect a quick harvest. We apply for a job and we want an instant yes. But God's ways transcend this framework. He is concerned with eternal outcomes, with growth that lasts, with blessings that don't fade. His perfect timing is part of His greater plan to shape us and our circumstances for lasting good. Moreover, God's timing is about His control over the entire narrative of our lives. While we may focus on individual chapters, the seasons of waiting, the times of trial, the moments of triumph, God holds the whole story in His hands. When a delay occurs, it is not a sign of neglect, but a deliberate act of divine governance. He is weaving all the threads together, making sure that nothing is out of place or missing. This control brings assurance that the things we long for, the answers we seek, and the breakthroughs we hope for will come exactly when they are supposed to. God's timing also protects us from what we might rush into out of impatience. Sometimes the thing we think we want immediately might not be the best for us at that moment. If God allowed us to have everything at once, without the necessary preparation or the right context, it could lead to harm or missed opportunities. The delays we face often serve as a shield, guarding us from mistakes and guiding us toward greater blessings. This protective aspect of God's timing reveals His deep care and wisdom. In addition, trusting in God's perfect timing helps us develop a deeper faith. When we recognize that His timing is flawless, we begin to rest in His promises rather than our own plans. This surrender is not easy because it challenges our desire for control and certainty. Yet, it is in this surrender that we find peace. We stop striving to force things to happen and instead align ourselves with God's rhythm. This alignment brings a profound sense of calm, even when circumstances around us seem uncertain. The perfect timing of God is also closely tied to His faithfulness. Throughout Scripture, We see countless examples of God acting at just the right moment, whether it's delivering his people from danger, sending a promised child, or providing guidance in times of confusion. These stories remind us that God's timing is consistent and reliable. It is not arbitrary, but grounded in his character as a loving and faithful Father. Understanding that God's timing is perfect means recognizing that every delay has meaning and every moment of waiting is part of a divine purpose. Our impatience often comes from looking only at the present moment or our immediate desires. But God's perspective is eternal, and his timing reflects an understanding of all that is necessary for our ultimate good. As we learn to trust in this perfect timing, we become more patient, more hopeful, and more willing to let go of our own timetables. We grow in confidence that what God has promised will come to pass, not a moment too soon, not a moment too late. His timing is perfect because it is rooted in his perfect knowledge, love, and sovereignty over all things. Patience is an essential aspect of faith, especially when it comes to trusting God's timing. In a world that constantly pushes for immediate gratification, waiting can feel like a struggle. Yet, patience is not simply about enduring time or counting the days until something happens. It is an active, intentional practice of trusting God, even when the outcome seems distant or uncertain. Learning to be patient is learning to place full confidence in God's plan, knowing that he is working behind the scenes for our good. When we speak of patience as part of faith, we recognize that faith is not passive. Faith is dynamic, a living trust in God's promises even when we do not yet see their fulfillment. Patience flows from this kind of faith. It's the willingness to wait without giving up, without losing hope, and without doubting God's goodness or power. This is a challenge because waiting often tests our resolve, stretching our trust to its limits. But through this process, our faith is refined and strengthened. Waiting with patience requires a shift in perspective. Instead of focusing on how long the wait feels or the discomfort of uncertainty, patience invites us to focus on who God is. It reminds us that God's timing is not based on our schedules, but on his perfect wisdom. When we learn to see waiting as a divine opportunity rather than a setback, we begin to embrace the growth and transformation that can happen during this time. The Bible is filled with stories of individuals who had to learn patience in their faith journey. Abraham and Sarah waited decades for the promised child. Joseph endured years of imprisonment before seeing his dreams fulfilled. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading the Israelites to freedom. Each of these examples shows us that waiting is not wasted time, but a necessary season in God's plan. These periods of waiting prepared them for greater responsibilities, deeper trust, and a fuller experience of God's blessing. Patience also teaches us to surrender control. In our impatience, we often try to take matters into our own hands, pushing for results or shortcuts. But patience requires us to relinquish that need for control and rest in God's sovereign timing. It's a posture of humility, recognizing that God's plans are higher and his timing is wiser. This surrender doesn't mean we are passive or indifferent. Rather, it means actively choosing to trust God's process instead of our own instincts. One of the profound benefits of patience is the peace it brings. When we rush or fight against the waiting, we experience anxiety, frustration, and fear. But when we embrace patience, we are able to experience God's peace that surpasses understanding. This peace guards our hearts and minds, allowing us to endure trials with hope and confidence. Patience enables us to navigate uncertainty without being overwhelmed, trusting that God is faithful and will fulfill His promises at the right time. Furthermore, patience opens the door to deeper dependence on God. In the waiting, we learn to rely more on Him for strength, guidance, and encouragement. It becomes a season of spiritual growth where we develop character traits like endurance, perseverance, and trustworthiness. These qualities not only sustain us through difficult times, but also prepare us for the blessings and responsibilities that will come. Patience also builds empathy and compassion. When we have waited and struggled ourselves, we become more understanding of others who are in seasons of waiting. This shared experience can encourage community and support among believers, reminding us that none of us journeys alone. We can encourage one another to remain steadfast, bearing each other's burdens as we wait on God's perfect timing. Ultimately, patience rooted in faith is a declaration that we believe God is good. His promises are true, and His timing is flawless. It is an active stance of trust that refuses to be shaken by delays or setbacks. Instead of giving in to despair or doubt, patience allows us to hold on to hope, knowing that God's plan is unfolding exactly as it should, even if we can't see all the pieces just yet. God's plans are always greater than ours, and this truth is fundamental when it comes to trusting His timing. As human beings, we often set our sights on specific outcomes, imagining the path we believe we should take or the timing we hope things will unfold. Yet, God's perspective is vastly different from ours. He sees the entire landscape of our lives, including the past, present, and future, and His plans encompass far more than what we can understand or anticipate. One of the reasons God's plans exceed our own is because He is infinitely wise and loving. While we may desire immediate results or certain blessings, God's vision includes factors we cannot see: our spiritual growth, the well-being of others, and the ultimate purpose of our journey. Sometimes what we ask for might be limited or even harmful in ways we don't recognize. God, in His perfect knowledge, knows what is best for us at every stage. He is orchestrating a plan that not only addresses our immediate needs, but also aligns with His greater purposes in our lives and the world around us. When we realize that God's plans are bigger than ours, it shifts our focus from control to trust. Instead of insisting on our timeline or insisting that things happen exactly as we envision, we learn to surrender our desires to His greater plan. This surrender is not a sign of weakness or giving up. Rather, it is an act of faith that acknowledges God's sovereignty and wisdom. We accept that His ways are higher and His timing is perfect, even when it contradicts our expectations. This understanding also helps us make sense of delays and unanswered prayers. When God delays a blessing or takes a different route than we expected, it is often because He is working something far greater than we realize. Perhaps He is preparing us for a responsibility we are not yet ready to handle, or maybe He is positioning us to impact others in ways we hadn't imagined. These moments of waiting or redirection are not setbacks. They are essential parts of God's expansive plan that go beyond our limited view. God's plans also demonstrate His creativity and purpose. While we might see obstacles or detours as disruptions, God uses these moments to weave together a story of redemption, growth, and blessing. Every challenge and delay is part of a grand narrative designed to bring about the greatest good. His plans are like a masterful tapestry, with each thread contributing to a beautiful and meaningful whole. Trusting that God's plans are greater than ours means embracing the mystery and complexity of His work, even when it feels confusing. Another key aspect of trusting God's greater plans is recognizing His ultimate goal for our lives. God's desire is not just to give us what we want, but to shape us into the people He created us to be. His plans involve molding our character, refining our faith, and deepening our love for Him and others. Sometimes this means that what we perceive as delay or denial is actually a loving process of transformation. God's plans are about more than circumstances. They are about the journey of becoming who He wants us to be. When we accept that God's plans are greater than ours, it also inspires hope and perseverance. We may not have all the answers or see the full picture, but we can trust that God's purposes are good and His promises are sure. This hope gives us strength to keep moving forward, even when the path is unclear. It encourages us to remain faithful and patient, knowing that the final outcome will exceed what we could have imagined. Finally, understanding that God's plans surpass our own helps us live with humility. It reminds us that we are not in control, and that's a good thing. Our limitations and uncertainties are met by God's infinite power and perfect wisdom. When we embrace this truth, we free ourselves from the burden of forcing outcomes or timelines, and instead rest in the assurance that God is working all things together for our good. God's plans are grander, richer, and more purposeful than anything we can conceive. Trusting in that truth changes the way we approach waiting, challenges, and unanswered prayers. It invites us into a deeper faith, a faith that believes God is always at work, even when we cannot see it yet. Growth happens in the waiting, a reality that often goes unnoticed in our fast-paced world. We tend to view waiting periods as idle or wasted time, but in God's design, these seasons are essential for our development. When we find ourselves in moments of delay or uncertainty, it is not simply a pause, but an opportunity for God to work deeply within us, shaping our character, faith, and readiness for what lies ahead. During the waiting, God cultivates qualities in us that cannot be hurried or bypassed. Patience is one of the most obvious fruits that develop when we wait on God's timing. Waiting teaches us endurance and perseverance, helping us to remain steadfast even when circumstances are discouraging. This endurance is vital because life will often challenge us, and without the strength built in these quiet seasons, we may falter when faced with future trials. Beyond patience, the waiting period is a time for spiritual growth. It is during these moments that we are invited to deepen our relationship with God. As we wait, we learn to depend more on Him, to seek His presence, and to listen more closely for His guidance. This dependence nurtures a faith that is not based on outcomes, but on trust in who God is. It is a faith that grows stronger as we experience God's faithfulness through the waiting. Waiting also refines our character. It humbles us, reminding us that we are not in control and that we must submit to God's will. This humility is necessary for growth because it opens our hearts to God's teaching and correction. In the waiting, we become more teachable, more sensitive to God's voice, and more willing to align our desires with His purposes. This transformation prepares us to handle the blessings or responsibilities that will come when God's timing is fulfilled. Moreover, the waiting period helps us gain clarity and perspective. When we rush toward our goals, we may miss important lessons or overlook obstacles. But when God delays or slows things down, it gives us space to reflect, to pray, and to consider His will more carefully. This time of reflection often leads to greater wisdom and discernment, allowing us to make better decisions when the time comes to move forward. God also uses the waiting to build our trust in Him. Each moment of waiting becomes a test of our faith and a chance to grow in confidence that God is faithful and true to His promises. When we see that God has been with us throughout the waiting, providing strength and peace, our trust deepens. This trust becomes a foundation that sustains us not only through the current season, but in all future challenges as well. In addition, growth in the waiting prepares us to be a witness to others. Our experiences of waiting and trusting God become testimonies of His faithfulness. When others see how we remain hopeful and faithful despite delays or difficulties, they are encouraged and inspired. Our growth becomes a light that points others to the goodness and timing of God. Sometimes the waiting is also a time for God to work in the lives of others connected to our journey. While we wait, God might be preparing the people, circumstances, or resources that will be necessary for the next step. This interconnectedness reveals that God's timing is comprehensive and relational, taking into account not just our individual needs, but the broader picture of His kingdom work. It is important to remember that growth during the waiting is often subtle and gradual. We may not always feel like we are changing or progressing, but God is faithfully at work. The challenges and uncertainties we face are not wasted moments. They are the soil in which our faith and character are rooted deeper. As we embrace growth in the waiting, we begin to see waiting not as a period of loss or frustration, but as a vital season of preparation and blessing. It is a time when God shapes us to become more like Christ, equipping us for the purpose He has set before us. This perspective transforms our attitude toward waiting and helps us to trust more fully in God's perfect timing. God's timing brings peace in ways that human timing simply cannot. When life doesn't go according to our plans, or when we face delays and unanswered questions, anxiety and frustration often flood our hearts. But trusting in God's timing invites a peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace that calms the storms within and steadies our souls. This peace comes from the assurance that God is sovereign over every moment of our lives. Unlike us, God is not bound by clocks, calendars, or deadlines. He is outside of time, working in ways that transcend our limited view. When we surrender to His timing, we release the pressure to control everything and instead rest in the knowledge that He is in control. This surrender replaces worry with calm, doubt with confidence, and fear with hope. Anxiety often arises when we try to rush things or when we push against the natural pace of life. When we insist on having things our way and on our schedule, we set ourselves up for disappointment. But God's timing reminds us that His plans are good and His purposes are perfect, even when they differ from ours. This realization helps us let go of impatience and embrace peace, knowing that God is working all things for our good. Trusting God's timing also means understanding that delays are not denials. Sometimes we interpret waiting as a sign that God is silent or inactive, but the truth is quite the opposite. God is always at work, even when we cannot see it. His timing includes moments of preparation, protection, and provision that we might miss if we hurried ahead. Recognizing this helps us rest peacefully, confident that God's plan is unfolding even in the waiting. This peace is deeply rooted in faith. Faith reminds us that God is trustworthy and faithful to his promises. When we hold on to faith during seasons of waiting, we experience a tranquility that guards our hearts. The peace that comes from trusting God's timing is not dependent on circumstances, but is anchored in the character of God himself. It is a peace that remains steady regardless of external chaos or uncertainty. Furthermore, this peace transforms how we live day to day. When we trust God's timing, we are less likely to be overwhelmed by stress or frustration. We become more patient with ourselves and with others. This peace fosters a sense of contentment, helping us appreciate the present moment instead of constantly chasing what's next. It allows us to enjoy God's presence and provision right now, knowing that he holds the future securely. The peace that comes from trusting God's timing also strengthens our relationships. When we are at peace, we are more loving, compassionate, and understanding toward those around us. Anxiety and impatience can strain our interactions, but peace brings harmony and grace. It enables us to encourage others who may also be struggling with waiting or uncertainty. In addition, peace guards us against the temptation to take shortcuts or make unwise decisions out of desperation. When we trust God's timing, we resist the urge to force outcomes or compromise our values. This steadiness protects us from mistakes and helps us remain faithful to God's leading. Peace empowers us to wait with integrity and hope. This peace is a gift from God, often received through prayer and meditation on his word. As we seek God and remind ourselves of his promises, our hearts find rest. Scripture encourages us to cast our anxieties on God because he cares for us. Through this act of surrender, peace floods our souls, quieting the noise of worry and doubt. Ultimately, trusting God's timing and receiving his peace go hand in hand. As we relinquish control and lean into his perfect plan, peace becomes our companion. It sustains us through difficult seasons and prepares us to embrace the blessings God has in store. This peace is not merely an absence of trouble, but a profound assurance that God is working all things for our good at just the right time. Faith requires surrender, and surrender is at the heart of trusting God's timing. It is not enough to simply believe that God exists or that he has a plan. True faith calls us to relinquish our own agendas, timelines, and control to embrace his wisdom completely. This surrender is a profound act of trust that acknowledges God's sovereignty and goodness, even when circumstances are confusing or difficult. Surrender means letting go of our desire to dictate how and when things should happen. We often come with a checklist of expectations and a timetable that fits our comfort and convenience, but God invites us to lay those down at his feet and say, "Not my will, but yours be done." This is not a one-time decision, but a daily posture of the heart. It requires humility to admit that our understanding is limited and that God's wisdom far exceeds our own. When we surrender, we open ourselves to God's perfect guidance. Instead of fighting against delays or pushing for our own solutions, surrender allows us to listen more closely for God's voice and to follow his leading. It creates space for God to work in ways we may never have anticipated. This openness often leads to greater blessings than we had planned because God's ways are higher than ours. Surrender is also a source of freedom. Holding tightly to our plans can create stress, anxiety, and frustration. But when we let go and trust God's timing, we release those burdens. We no longer carry the weight of forcing outcomes or worrying about the future. This freedom brings peace and joy, even in the midst of waiting. However, surrender is not passive resignation. It is an active choice to trust God fully. It means continuing to hope and pray, to prepare and persevere, all while resting in the assurance that God is in control. This dynamic trust sustains us through seasons of uncertainty and strengthens our relationship with God. Surrender also shapes our character. It teaches us patience, humility, and obedience. These qualities are cultivated when we say no to our own desires and yes to God's timing. Through surrender, we become more like Christ, who perfectly submitted to the Father's will even when it meant suffering and sacrifice. This imitation of Christ is the essence of faithful living. Moreover, surrender deepens our faith. Each time we choose to trust God's timing over our own, we build a stronger foundation. We learn that God's promises are true and that He is faithful to fulfill them in His way and in His time. This growing faith equips us to face future challenges with confidence and hope. Surrender also impacts our prayer life. When we release control, our prayers shift from demanding specific outcomes to seeking God's will above all else. We pray with open hearts, ready to receive whatever God provides. This attitude transforms our relationship with God from one of trying to persuade Him to one of communion and trust. Furthermore, surrender influences how we handle disappointment and setbacks. When things don't happen as we hoped or planned, surrender helps us accept God's will without bitterness or despair. It reminds us that God's timing and purposes are perfect, even when they don't align with our desires. This acceptance brings healing and peace. Surrender is an ongoing journey. It requires constant reminders and intentional choices to trust God anew each day. Our natural tendency is to control and plan, but faith calls us to a higher way, one of dependence and trust in the One who holds all things together. In surrendering to God's timing, we discover that His plans are always worth waiting for. We learn that His timing is a perfect expression of His love and care for us. This surrender transforms our lives, freeing us from anxiety, strengthening our faith, and aligning us more closely with God's will. Trusting God's timing is one of the most profound acts of faith we can embrace. It challenges our impatience, our desire for control, and our limited understanding, inviting us instead into a deeper relationship with a sovereign, loving God who orchestrates every moment perfectly. As we learn to trust His timing, we discover patience, peace, and growth that shape us into the people He created us to be. We realize that God's plans surpass our own, and that every waiting season is purposeful, preparing us for greater things. Surrendering our timelines to God's wisdom frees us from anxiety and invites a peace that transcends circumstance. Ultimately, trusting God's timing is not merely about waiting. It is about believing that God is faithful, that His promises are true, and that His perfect timing will bring about the very best for our lives. In that trust, we find hope, strength, and a peace that endures beyond the moments we cannot yet see.